This is lesson 0.3, day 1. So this is just going to be a review of adding and subtracting decimals, which is something we'll be using heavily in chapter 3. So I would pause this screen, write this down. When we add decimals, we line up the decimals, then we add. When we subtract decimals, we again line up the decimals, and then we subtract. When we have negative decimals, we follow our integer rules of same sign, add and keep, different sign, subtract, and then we keep the sign of the larger absolute value. So some examples. The table shows your electricity usage for the end of the year in kilowatt hours. How many kilowatt hours were used in September and October? So we know that if we're finding the total amount of hours for these 2 months, we're going to have to add those. So September has 490 and 72 hundredths. October has 501 and 88 hundredths. So I'm going to line up the decimals and then treat it like a normal addition problem. So 490.72 plus 501.88. So again, remembering to line up the decimals. Then we can just bring that decimal down and treat this like a normal addition problem. So 2 plus 8 is 10. Bring down the 0, carry the 1. 8 plus 7 is 15. Plus 1 is 16. So I bring down the 6, carry the 1. 1 plus 1 is 2. 9 plus 0 is 9. And 4 plus 5 is 9. So my answer is 992 and 60 hundredths kWh, kilowatt hours. Then it says how many more hours were used in December than November. So we're looking at December and November, and since we're trying to find that difference, we're going to subtract. So we take December's amount first, which is 538 and 296 thousandths, minus, and then remembering to line up the dot, 510 and 39 hundredths. Whenever I have an empty space, that empty place value, I'm always just going to plug in a 0 there. So whenever after the decimal we have that blank space, you always can just put in a 0. So now we have 6 minus 0, which is 6. 9 minus 9, which is 0. 2 minus 3, well, I can't do that, so I have to borrow from the 8. So the 8 turns into a 7. 2 turns into a 12. 12 minus 3, which is 9. Always want to bring down that decimal. We can't forget about that. 7 minus 0 is 7. 3 minus 1 is 2. And 5 minus 5 is 0. So I can just leave it blank. So my answer is 27 and 906 thousandths kWh for kilowatt hours. Couple reminders. We need to line up the decimal point when adding or subtracting. That's the most important. Same sign, add and keep. If they have different signs, we subtract. So when we're working with negatives, we follow those integer rules. So for number 1, we have 2 and 47 hundredths minus 8. Well, 2 and 47 hundredths is less than 8, so I know I have to change this subtraction to add up. So instead of minus 8, I'm going to do plus negative 8. Remember, always 2 marks. So now they have different signs, so I can use that rule of subtract. So I have 8 minus 2 and 47 hundredths. And what I can do here is I can add a decimal to the 8 and add on as many zeros as I need. Because 8.0 is the same as 8.000, it's the same as 8. And now I'm going to treat this like a normal subtraction problem. I'm going to bring down that decimal point. And then I can't do 0 minus 7. I can't do 0 minus 4. I have to borrow from the 8. So the 8 becomes a 7. My 0 becomes a 9, and my second 0 then becomes a 10. 10 minus 7 is 3. 9 minus 4 is 5. Double checking that I have my decimal in the right place. And 7 minus 2 is 5. So my answer, as of right now, I have 5 and 53 hundredths. But now I need to follow that rule. When I had different signs, we subtracted, and then we have to keep the sign of the larger absolute value. Negative 8 has a larger absolute value, so my answer is going to be negative 5 and 53 hundredths. We also know that if we have 2 and we take away 8, it's definitely going to be in the negatives. Okay, then for the second one, we have negative 12.5 minus 4.55. We have subtraction here, so we need to add up. When we're working with decimals, we always want to add up. When we're working with negatives, we always want to add up. And now we have same sign, add and keep. So I'm just going to add these two numbers together and keep the sign. So remember, when I add decimals, I have to line up the dot. And then whenever I have that empty place value, I always can just fill in a 0. And I'm going to add these together. Bring down my decimal. 0 plus 5 is 5. 5 plus 5 is 10. So I bring down the 0, carry the 1. 2 plus 1 is 3. Plus 4 is 7. Bring down the 1. So I get 17 and 5 hundredths. But remember, same sign, add and keep. I keep that sign. So negative 17 and 5 hundredths. Our next problem says you run 400 meters in 58.01 seconds. What is the difference of your time in the school record of 55.49 seconds? So we're finding the difference. So we're going to subtract. So I'm going to start with that larger number, 58 and 100th, minus, I'm lining up the dot, 55 and 49 hundredths. Okay, now I'm going to subtract. 1 minus 9 I can't do. I can't borrow from the 0, so I have to borrow from this 8. Turns into a 7. The 0 turns into, really what's happening is we're changing that to a 10, and then we have to borrow from that 10 to get to our ones place, so we have 9, and this becomes 11 because I add 10 onto that. 11 minus 9 is 2. 9 minus 4 is 5. Bring down my decimal. 7 minus 5 is 2. And 5 minus 5 is 0. So my answer is 2 and 52 hundredths seconds. This next problem says that Beth went to the store and bought $38.89 worth of groceries. She gave the cashier $50. How much money will Beth get back? So we know that she started with $50, and I'm going to add that decimal in right away. So we have $50.00. So I'm going to write that as 50.00. And then she paid the cashier $38.89. So we're going to subtract $38.89 from that 50, making sure that we're lining up the decimal. We're going to slide that decimal down to keep its place. And then we have to just treat this like a normal subtraction problem. So 0 minus 9, well, we can't borrow from 0. We can't borrow from 0. We have to borrow all the way from the 5. So the 5 changes to a 4. Then this 0 would change to a 10. But then we have to slide it over even more. So we'll change that to a 9. Changes that to a 10. We have to borrow from that 10, which changes that to a 9. Which changes this last one to a 10. 10 minus 9 is 1. 9 minus 8 is 1. 9 minus 8 is 1. 4 minus 3 is 1. Making sure that I have my decimal in the correct spot. So if she started with $50 and she bought $38.89 worth of groceries, she is going to get back $11.11. Our last problem says, is the sum of 105 and 235 thousandths and 27 and 5/10 less than or greater than the difference of 179 and 68 hundredths and 55 and 2 hundredths. So there's multiple parts to this problem. The first part is finding the sum of 105.235 and 27.5. So I'm going to line up the decimal and add those together. Making sure I'm always lining up that decimal when I'm adding or subtracting. I can fill in zeros for those empty place value spots. And then I'm just going to bring down my decimal and add these numbers. 5 plus 0 is 5. 3 plus 0 is 3. 2 plus 5 is 7. 5 plus 7 is 12, so I bring down the 2, carry the 1. 2 plus 1 is 3, bring down the 1. So I have 132 and 735 thousandths. And then the problem is asking, is that less than or greater than the difference of 179 and 68 hundredths and 55 and 2 hundredths? So the difference of these two numbers means I have to subtract. So I'm going to take 179 and 68 hundredths minus 55 and 2 hundredths, making sure I'm lining up the decimal. Then I carry that decimal down, and then I'm just going to treat this like a normal subtraction problem. 8 minus 2 is 6. 6 minus 0 is 6. 9 minus 5 is 4. 7 minus 5 is 2. And then I carry down the 1. So we know that this first total of 132 and 735 thousandths is great.